Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Though I am wondering if we're interrupting your nap right now and the potential impact of that on the crowd this afternoon. So, to heed a biblical warning, I encourage you to gird up the loins of your mind as we spend some time studying the Word of God together. I do appreciate so much your presence tonight. I want to commend you. I do special events like this occasionally, and the norm is that there's a great crowd on Sunday morning, and that's about it. And there is sure a great crowd this afternoon. I commend you for that. That is not what typically happens, and that says so much about your interest in spiritual things. That's encouraging to me. I want to put this scripture up on the slide. This is from the latter part of Acts chapter 9. And I'm just going to kind of leave it up there through the whole sermon because it's going to stand in pretty sharp contrast to a story I want to share with you here at the beginning. It is Luke's rather upbeat assessment of the work of the early disciples at that point in the story. He said, so the church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria enjoyed peace, being built up and going on in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit. It continued to increase. Just let that image simmer in the back of your mind as I share this story with you. I was preaching years ago in the Chicago area. It was in the very early years of my work as a preacher. I was a young man, and I tell you that because the experience I want to share made a powerful impression on me. There was a congregation up way closer in toward the city. I was in the suburbs. And they invited me to come up and do an event for them like this. And so I drove up on the first evening that I was supposed to speak, and I pulled up in front of this large church building. I guess it would accommodate 300 or more people. And for the upper Midwest, that is extraordinarily unusual. So I was just impressed with the size of the building. And I remember standing in the aisle that first night with one of the sisters after it was over, and she was telling me how in years gone by, when they had special events, they had filled up that building to overflowing. She talked about putting chairs in the aisles to accommodate the overflowing crowd. But I want to tell you, folks, that is not what the crowd looked like the week that I was there. Maybe it had something to do with the speaker. I don't know. But there was a center aisle and two sections, one on one side, one on the other, and the entire group was over here on the left side, and they occupied two pews right down front. Okay? At least they sat down front. I was thankful for that. And they all sat together in one big clump. The second night I was supposed to speak, I got there early. I was worried about traffic. And so the only other person that was there was the guy who had to unlock the building. So he opened it up and let me in, and he was busy turning on lights. And I just walked down this hallway. I had some time to kill. And what was a pretty large wing off of the auditorium for Bible classes. I'm just a little bit nosy. And so I kind of went down the hall and I was peeking in the doors. And you could tell that at some point in the past they had Bible class there. And you could also tell it had been a long, long time since anyone had Bible class there. And that was no surprise because the little group down over here on the two rows, they were all old people. And there were no children at all. And all that big wing of Bible classes, those rooms had just become dusty storage closets. What had happened is over 3 or 4 decades, this once thriving congregation had just year after year slowly declined and declined to the point where there were just a handful left, struggling to keep the doors open. And frankly, I was not very optimistic about how that was going to turn out. I will tell you this, they lasted longer than I thought they would. But they did not last. And eventually they dwindled so far that there was nobody there to keep the building open anymore. And so somewhere, sometime, someone had turned off the lights in that church building and locked that door for the very last time. And that church died. That's a sad story, isn't it? But let me tell you what else you and I know. It is not an unusual story, is it? And maybe you know that personally. Maybe the church that you grew up in, at some point along the way, after you grew up and went on somewhere else, they had to close up shop too because there was nobody to keep the door open anymore. In my little circle of experience, I see this all the time. And I will admit, it's just my little circle. I do events like this 4 or 5 times a year for churches. And then my wife and I do a good bit of traveling. And so we see churches in all over different kinds of parts of the country and things like that. And I will tell you, it is an exceptional thing, an unusual thing to encounter a group that seems to be doing well, that seems to be thriving. More often than not, we encounter churches that, at least from outer appearances, seem like maybe they're holding their own. But most of the time, we encounter churches that are declining. And I think if you're kind of rehearsing in your brain, your circle of experience, you have probably seen that too. And what I mean by that is, if you could go back 3 or 4 decades, as year by year passed, the church just shrank and got smaller and smaller, and that's just how the trend lines are running. Now, when I say things like that, inevitably, I get some brethren who are unhappy with me, and they will say things like, David, it isn't just about the numbers. And some people will say, we may not be seeing our numbers go up, but there's great spiritual growth going on in the congregation here. People say things like that too. But I'm going to tell you what, brothers and sisters, and please hear me on this. When the number is 0, who's going to unlock the door and turn on the lights? And suddenly it's about the numbers, isn't it? Those who study church growth in a more formal way tell us that it is an epidemic that goes from coast to coast across the country. Churches, generally speaking, are in a state of decline. I believe, brothers and sisters, there's something underneath that it's deeper than just churches declining. I think it represents the general spiritual decline of the country. What's happening to us spiritually, individually, is also affecting what's happening with our congregations. Churches are declining. Now, it has occurred to me that it isn't the best way to begin a whole week of study together with that kind of grim picture of things. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, thank you for coming today and sharing that bright way of sunshine with us this afternoon. I just could have stayed home and took a nap rather than listen to that. Listen, I don't intend to be dark and pessimistic this afternoon. We're going to turn this and do something positive with it. But I would say to you, brothers and sisters, that we cannot afford to be naive about this either. We can't bury our head in the sand and ignore what is going on around the country, all around us. I think what is more important is to talk about why it's happening. How is it that over 3 or 4 decades, a church that's thriving, a building that's full like this one is this afternoon, how is it that a church like that over 3 or 4 decades can wind up with 20 people struggling to keep the doors open? What I'd like to do is talk to you about that for a little while this afternoon. And see if we can identify some of the causes to the end that we would hear in that a call to action. I don't know where the Kleinwood Church will be in 50 years. I'm planning to be dead by that point in time. But I am concerned with where the Kleinwood Church is in 2024. And I'm thinking about where it needs to be in 2025. I think on our watch, we need to be concerned about this problem, figure out why it's happening, and doing what we can do in our time to be sure it doesn't happen to us. So can we do that together? Can we struggle with this question of why churches decline, and out of that find some calls to action so that on our watch we can be sure it doesn't happen where we are? That's what I want to do this afternoon. Not too dark, right? A little bit dark, but some light at the end of the tunnel. Let's work on that. So let me walk you through. I got a list of 3 things. In fact, I almost always have a list of 3 things. You can know where all the sermons are going this week. Number 1 is this. Churches decline because they do not teach lost people. I know you're shocked to see that, right? But I put it first on the list because that's where it belongs. It is the number 1 reason churches decline and die, because they are not actively out in the community reaching lost people. Now, I want you to hear me on this, folks. There is a reality here that we're bumping up against that we just cannot afford to ignore. So let me be very plain about this. Unless we are out working our circle of influence, trying to find the lost out there who are interested in learning about Jesus and starting those conversations and having those Bible studies and extending those invitations to come and visit and helping those people make their way to Christ and baptizing them into Christ for the remission of their sins and then grooming to become dedicated disciples, if that is not part of our DNA as disciples and churches, you could start the clock. That will tick down to the moment when someone locks the doors of this building for the last time. Now, sometimes we struggle to believe that because there are circumstances that allow us to ignore our neglect of this work. For example, some congregations find themselves in parts of the country where the economy is really good. And where the economy is good, there are typically jobs. And where there are jobs, people come, right? I used to preach on the Gulf Coast in Beaumont, Texas. And what we do in Beaumont, Texas is probably the ugliest place on the planet. I mean, I think it would give New Jersey a run for its money, okay? Just ugly, ugly. But we make gasoline in Beaumont, Texas. Are you with me on that? So while you are griping about high gas prices in Beaumont, Texas, they're celebrating. That's good. Production's up, making lots of money. That's good for Beaumont, Texas. And when that's going on, people would move to our little part of the country, right? Where the economy is good, people come. And there are Christians in that group who begin to make their way into churches in that area, right? And so people start moving in, and what happens to our attendance? Well, it starts going up. The pews start filling because people are coming here. And some of those people have children who start filtering into our Bible classes. And all of a sudden we've got 32-year-olds in one class. God bless the lady that's got to teach that group, right? And then everybody comes into the auditorium like this, and we're squeezing in to make more rooms, and the elders are starting to say, man, we got to find a way to expand the auditorium because we're just busting out the walls here. And when we sing, it's like the roof is being lifted off. And when all that stuff is going on, people start saying, boy, this church is really thriving, right? We're really growing here. Do you realize, folks, that all that stuff can be happening and a church still be dying? Because the fundamental mission of God's people is being neglected. Will you remember that with me, please? What is at the end of the gospel record? What did Jesus say right at the end as he goes back to heaven and sends his disciples out? Matthew 28 and verse 19, go preach, or make disciples rather of all the nations. I was jumping ahead to Mark 16 and verse 15. Go preach the gospel to every creature. And oddly enough, New Testament disciples thought that was a commandment, that they were supposed to do it. And so Acts 8 and verse 4, for example, even after people are getting killed for preaching about Jesus, the text says even though they were scattered, they went everywhere preaching the word. That mission can be neglected even as the numbers go up. But here's the problem with leaning on the economy to fill our pews. The economy changes, right? Some of you may remember the early 1980s when oil prices plummeted and there was a crisis, right? That was not good for Beaumont, Texas. The church that I would later preach for there in the early 80s lost 100 people over a couple of years. Would y'all think about that? What if over the next 2 years, circumstances change right here and 100 families in this church had to move off somewhere else to get a job? What would the pews look like? Right? Here's the reality, folks. Churches that live by the economy will one day die by the economy. And let me just add that move-ins are not kingdom growth, right? Listen, if you should find yourself getting a job in Houston, Texas, and you're going to move down our way, we would love to have you at Kleinwood. Love to have you come throw in your efforts with us, right? That's all good, but it didn't add anybody to the kingdom of God. It's just shifting sheep around. Kingdom growth takes place. Paul says in Colossians 1, when someone has been transferred out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his beloved Son, right? Think about Acts 2 and verse 47. The Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. That kind of growth, conversion growth, brothers and sisters, is the lifeblood that keeps a church alive. When we're growing because of evangelism, it doesn't matter what the economy does, right? Someone moves off, we're just going to keep converting people from the community and bringing them in. But I promise you, especially the times in which we're living, if we don't do this, then the decline is going to begin. Okay, so that's the dark part. Let me ask you, can you hear a call to action in that? Is there something we need to be doing on our watch? There is. We need to be teaching lost people. It needs to become the focus of every congregation of God's people. We need, as preachers, to be talking about it all the time. I had a lady come to me one time, one of the churches I was working with, and she said, we just hear too much about evangelism at this church. I said, sister, you're in the wrong church then, because that's all you're going to hear about in the church. We're going to talk about it again and again and again. We need that. We need to stir our fires. We need classes that equip us to do the work well. We try to have at least one adult Bible class every year focused on some aspect of this work. Right now, we have a class going on called What Your Friends Believe, because we need to understand better what our friends out there believe, because they're way further gone than we think. And if we're going to build a bridge to get to them, it's got to be a longer bridge. And so we're talking about that. So our folks will be better equipped to talk to their friends about the gospel. There are a few things that I think churches can do to stir the fires of an evangelistic spirit, to encourage people to do this work. And I really want you to hear me on this. This is important. The work of winning lost people is first and foremost and primarily an individual responsibility. You all hear me on that? The work of winning lost people is primarily an individual responsibility. It's me and you going out into our circle of influence and thinking around about the people around us who need to know about Jesus, and thinking about how we're going to try to open doors and begin conversations and extending those invitations and having those Bible studies. It's about me and you doing the heavy lifting and making that happen every single day. Are you concerned about what will happen in this place on your watch? Then when you leave this building tonight, get a name in your head. Do it right now. Who do you know in your circle that doesn't know Jesus? And what can you do tomorrow, today, to start having a conversation, to try to reach them? Brothers and sisters, if we all did that, it would make a difference for the future of this congregation. But if nobody does it, then over time churches are going to decline until they die. We have to teach lost people. I'm going to try real hard not to just ramble on, because I could talk about this stuff forever. We'll talk about evangelism later in one of the morning classes this week. I want to give you something else to ponder. I think churches decline, secondly, because they lose their kids. Think about how those two go together, and then we'll knit that together in just a minute. They decline because they lose their kid. Let me tell you why that's on my list. I've heard so many people in declining churches make this statement, and I bet you've heard someone say this too. I've heard people say, if we just had half of the kids who grow up here still here, this building would be full. Now, when people say that, there is a question that needs to follow, right? It's always the question in my mind. When people say that, my question is, okay, where did the kids go? Where do they go? I don't know how it is here at Eastside. I can tell you how it is at Kleinwood, where I preach. Our kids grow up with us. And then 1 hour down the road is Texas A&M University. I don't know why anyone would go to school there. But I can tell you why our kids go to school there. It's an hour down the road, far enough for independence, close enough to get someone to do my laundry and give me food. And so a lot of our kids go off to A&M to go to college. But what happens is they get over there, and our girls meet these punk boys and fall in love with them. And they wind up marrying those boys who move them off to Dallas or Austin or Atlanta, and they never come back. Does that happen to y'all? Because it happens to us. And sometimes our guys just find jobs in other places and have to go off and work someplace else. The economy is pulling them elsewhere. A lot of our kids grow up and they just never do come back. Their lives take them somewhere else. But you know and I know that isn't the only reason the kids aren't here anymore. And it isn't the main reason the kids aren't here anymore. The primary problem is that kids are growing up among us, and then they leave home, and then we don't see them anymore because they leave Jesus. That's the hard truth. I don't know what the numbers are for our brethren, because I don't think anyone has ever undertaken to do a formal study of how many kids we lose. I can tell you that the studies done in the broader religious world are absolutely, profoundly disturbing. Among denominations, 60, 70, I've seen numbers as high as 80% of the kids who grow up in those groups, after they leave home and go off to college, will no longer be part of any religious group at all. There are a long time people were saying, yeah, they leave during the college years, but they come back when they're adults. They're not coming back. And again, I would contend what we might be seeing here is the general decline of religion in our culture eating up our children too. I don't know the numbers among us, But I know the kids. I've had them in Bible class. And they're leaving us. Now, remember, I asked you to think about how these two go together. Will you knit these two together? If we are not doing anything to bring in outsiders through evangelism, and 50, 60, 70% of our kids, after they leave home, are leaving Jesus, do you see how that accelerates the problem of decline? Here's my question. Do you see a call to action in that? I would suggest, brothers and sisters, that after evangelism, one of our primary concerns as a church family needs to be taking care of the young people among us. We need to have a laser-like focus to be sure that while they are here, we help our kids build this rock-solid spiritual foundation that will help them stick with the Lord when they leave us and go out into life. I say that because they are the most at-risk group among us. Have you ever thought about that? I won't ask for a show of hands because I'm just not that dumb. But if you're over the age of 60, you can celebrate tonight, because the chances of you walking away from Jesus, I mean, they're almost zero. Nobody gets into their 70s and 80s and said, been doing this religion thing my whole life. I'm done with that. I'm walking away. People do not do that. In fact, if you are over the age of 30, I might get a show of hands on that, maybe. If you're over the age of 30, your odds are not quite as good as the 60-plus crowd, but it's close. If you're still serving God past 30, the likelihood that you'll keep on doing that are extraordinarily strong. But you take everyone sitting in this building tonight under the age of 30. And if you're average, half, more than half, another decade won't be serving Jesus. You see what I'm saying? The most at-risk group among us. And so one of the things I think is really important is to think about children's Bible classes. It is the one thing we do when we gather that is uniquely for young people. And I think we need to make those classes extraordinary. Best teachers, careful thought about curriculum. Think about the world they're going to have to be ready to face. We need to have great Bible classes for kids. We need to get kids involved in the church work, church family in a meaningful way. They need tight connections with the congregation and the things we are doing. If all we expect our kid to do is come and sit on a pew, when they leave home and go off somewhere else, what are they going to do? They're going to go and sit in the pew and then maybe not. We could take our young men and begin grooming them to lead public worship. Our young men and women can begin to be groomed and trained to work in our Bible class program. They can be encouraged to serve those in the congregation who have needs, like elderly people. I think it's extraordinarily useful to partner young people and older people in the church. There's so much wisdom to be gained for that. Lots and lots of ways to get kids involved in a meaningful way. Now, having said that, there is a little bit that churches can do to help get kids ready to face the world. But we all know that primarily this is not a battle we win in the walls of this building. And I really need to dispel that idea. It's a battle that's won or lost at home. If you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, when I talk about kids back home, I always wind up in Deuteronomy chapter 6. I just think that's such an important text. I'm going to point you here tonight, Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you look at the first 3 verses, it is clear that Moses is concerned that with the same thing we are tonight as we talk about this. He wants future generations to be faithful. And so here's what he says about this. This is Deuteronomy 6, picking up in verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. These words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. I will talk about this a little bit. I think it's Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, in one of the morning segments. But let me just say for now, we need to make God and His covenant relationship with us the atmosphere that fills our house. Our kids knowing the Lord and being passionate about serving Him, developing spiritual disciplines, good students, good prayer habits need to be the most important things happening at your house. Why? Because your kids are going to die. Now that was dark, and it's true. My question is, when your kids die, what will matter? Not their little league batting average. Not their SAT scores. Not where they went to college and how much debt they stuck you with for going there. Not where they worked or what they drove or what their house looked like or where they took their vacation. The only thing that will matter when your kids die is, did they know Jesus? And if that's the only thing that matters when they die, it needs to be the only thing that matters now. Do y'all agree with me about that? So that's what needs to fill the atmosphere at our house. Now, brothers and sisters, we do that first and foremost because there just isn't anything more important than kids going to heaven. But I would add as a secondary reason, having generations dedicated to Jesus impacts the future of our church family. We raise our kids to be dedicated disciples, everyone is blessed. When we don't, everyone loses. Churches are dying because they're losing their kids. Not on our watch. All right, I need to wrap this up. One more thing. Can you hang with me a little bit longer? I want to give you a third reason that churches are declining. They're declining because they fight and divide. Surprised to see any of these on the list? I will tell you why I added this one. I found it to be a connecting thread between churches that were declining. Another element of the problem was they had trouble getting along with each other. And here's the odd thing. For most of the years that I've been preaching, almost 4 decades now, the stuff churches have fussed about have been petty, not big doctrinal, theological battles. Silly stuff. Can I give you all the worst example of that I'd ever seen? I was in this little town that had 3 churches. And I got to tell you, they almost weren't big enough to have one, right? 3 churches. And I was curious about that. So I asked one of the guys that preached in the area, I said, why 3? That seems like a lot of unnecessary overhead. And he said, well, I can tell you what happened in one place. We had a big battle. Y'all aren't going to believe this when I say it to you. We had a big battle over ceiling fans. I was so relieved when I came in and y'all didn't have any fans. One less thing to fuss over, right? I thought he was kidding. Ceiling fans. My reaction to that was, wouldn't a sweater fix that problem? What do you mean you had a big battle over ceiling fans? You know, folks, that kind of meaningless squabbling hampers our work together. I'm guessing that 2 ladies who were on opposite sides of the ceiling fan controversy probably aren't going to partner to teach the 2-year-olds next quarter. And then everybody else has to watch that, and it's discouraging. But it got worse because this controversy actually split the church. 2 groups rose out of that division. 2 weak struggling groups. Now, can y'all see how all of this knits together? We're not bringing any new blood through conversion, and we're losing a lot of our future with our kids falling away. And then what remains, let's just trample that to death with a bunch of senseless fighting. Did Paul talk about that? In Galatians 5, isn't that kind of the thing he alludes to down in verse 15? This is Galatians 5. Look at verse 13. For you were called to freedom, brethren. Only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now watch 15. But if you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. I wanted to leave straight talk up there all the time I'm talking. So if it gets a little dicey, at least you'll know it's what we said we were going to do, right? So can I be real straight with you? This senseless squabbling, it's wicked. It's sinful. It hinders this mission we have to go win lost people. Instead of battling the adversary, we're battling with each other. It's counter to the purpose Jesus had for us in John chapter 17 when he said he desires that we would be one. It's contrary to the love that we're supposed to have for one another. And so I think we need to be warned, brothers and sisters. People who stir this kind of senseless fussing among church families are going to answer to God for that one day. So is there something to be learned from that? A couple of things let me mention, and then we'll wrap this up. Number one, churches cannot thrive in an atmosphere of acrimony. Can y'all hear me on that? Churches cannot thrive in that atmosphere. So it's one or the other. Either we're going to thrive or we're going to fuss. And so will you think about that next time something upsets you? I have a 24-hour rule now because when I get irritated about something, my impulse is to grab an elder and give him an earful, right? And I have found over the years that was really counterproductive. So I have a 24-hour rule now. If I get upset about something, I make myself sleep on it first. And I tell you the weird thing about that is, now that I've started doing that, about 90% of the time, if I'll just sleep on it and think about it and give it a day, it feels real different the next day. It's a whole lot easier just to let it go. Is it really worth wasting the critical time we need to be spending taking care of our kids and reaching lost people to fuss over whatever this petty issue is? Secondly, I think we need to work really hard at getting along with each other. Ephesians chapter 4, if you'll jump ahead there, Ephesians 4, Paul talks about that. As he begins the practical portion of this letter, in verse number 1, he said, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called. Now that's big stuff, right? You with me on that? This is talking about walking and being, living the kind of life that Jesus wants me to live. Notice he says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. It's interesting to me that as he starts talking about our walk, in that very first sentence, he says, you guys need to work really hard to get along with each other. It's like he knows that that's a struggle, right? And that's what the language means in verse 3. When he says being diligent, the idea is ongoing hard work. We don't ever get to this place where we're unified and together and say, okay, we've done that, put it on the shelf, move on to somewhere else. What the Spirit is saying is, you guys got to work at this all the time. Because I tell you, folks, churches are weird collections of people. You ever thought about what a weird group this is? I mean, I bet there are some people in this crowd who, like my wife, like opera. How disturbing is that? And on the flip side of that, there are probably some people here who like bluegrass. What's wrong with y'all? Right? And all kinds of differences in between. We're a different collection of people. Sometimes the only thing that binds us together is the fact that we love and are devoted to Jesus Christ. And one of my elder friends has reminded me over and over again, and that is the most important thing. So we got to work at this all of the time. It means I'm not always going to get my way about things. Look around you. How many people are here? How many different people are here? How many opinions are there going to be about how things ought to be done? So I won't always get my way. Judgment call will have to be made, and I need to be okay with that. Can I fuss a little bit? Just a little bit. This business of not getting my way in a matter of judgment and getting 2 or 3 of my friends to pack up and leave and go somewhere else, which is real convenient in this part of the country because there are a lot of options. It's just sinful, folks. I know the young people get mad at the elders because they didn't want to sing a song that the young people wanted to sing. And people packed up and left over that. What is that about? Over a song? Come on, folks. We got to do better than that. I can't always have my way about everything. And I need to be okay with that. I need to be really committed to unity. I get upset. I'm not going to pack up and go somewhere else. I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to work out my problems. In fact, would you look at verse number 2 again? I passed over that verse for too long talking about unity. And that was a mistake because verse 2 is the key to this. Do you see it there? Because what he does in verse 2 is he identifies the character traits that are necessary for unity to exist. He talks about patience and humility and gentleness and love. God's people need to work harder to develop those qualities. So many of our fusses just result from disciples acting like spiritual children. We need to be grown-ups like Jesus. I am not saying that there's never a time to go to battle. In fact, can I be candid with you? We are coming into a season where there are going to be some battles to wage over truth and error, which is why we don't need to waste 1 minute fussing over the stuff that doesn't matter. Thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate you coming this afternoon. This business of churches thriving and declining, it really, really is an important conversation, brothers and sisters, because what we're talking about is churches being effective at doing the work of God. Do you see that? And the work of God is the business of help people finding their way to God and ultimately being with God in the end. It's the most important work on the planet. We need to thrive at that work because there's nothing more important than being right with God. And so as we wrap up, maybe there's someone in this crowd that knows you're not. Maybe you've never chosen for the first time to be a follower of Jesus, or you have and you just haven't stuck with that path. There's nothing more important than being right with God. And so as we do with every service, we close with this song designed to encourage you to take whatever steps you need to make things right with Him. Maybe you don't even know. We'll help you figure that out. But if you need to make things right with Jesus and you're ready, come on down to the front right now while we stand, while we sing together.